Welcome everyone to the Leopard Society Podcast. Glad you're here. This space will be dedicated to the education of the African race, but many other things will be discussed such as geopolitics, finance, history, and whatever else we see fit that the people need to hear about. Of course, since everyone here is new, because this is the first episode, I'll get started with an introduction as to who we are and what we stand for. We as the Leopard Society stand to be a sanctuary for dialogue, culture, and collective action, a place where identity meets intellect. Because many black folks search for a place where they can discuss, collaborate, and educate themselves on who they are and where they come from. Because it goes as unsaid that the black community has been forced into a precarious position of turmoil and internal conflict, and sometimes just manipulation by intelligence agencies to keep us down. And of course, we can't forget about the many other things in our history, going back from slavery, Jim Crow, and of course, systematic and economic racism. Things that have plagued our community for over 100 years, putting us in this position we are in today. And a lot of these things has led to our people to be disorganized and unmotivated, but we're here to help change that. Because I know personally it can be disheartening to hear the constant blasphemies people spread about black folk, that we don't work, we aren't smart, that we're dangerous, that we're uneducated and unable to organize. None of this is true. None of it. So part of the purpose of the Leopard Society is to give the ones a space who need it, to push back on these blasphemies and to be a part of something greater than what they're told. Because black power is a real thing, and we're here to help establish that. All of us, from the one typing in the comment section to you watching this video right now, we're all a part of the same mission. We look up to many great figures like Malcolm X, Frederick Douglass, and some lesser known figures like Charles Hamilton Houston, who was the first Supreme Court judge, and the topic of today's video, which will be Reverend Tunis G. Campbell. We'll talk more about him later. And to continue with our introduction, our name, this isn't the origin of our name. Our founder, he got the name as sort of a divine coincidence. It came to him one day, so he decided to name the organization after it. But after some research into the name itself, we found this interesting information, which I thought I would share with you guys. So, there's an actual fraternity in West and Central Africa named the Leopard Society, also referred to as the Anyoto. The rumors of this society involve the use of witchcraft and human sacrifice in order to transform into leopards. Now, that does sound like a bit much to some people, but that's what people say about them. And they were involved in some crude things like cannibalism and, of course, human sacrifice and blood ritual. But They were more than that. They had a lot of philosophies and intricate initiation. There's a story told about the Leopard Society. A woman in Africa tells about this man who wanted to be initiated into the Leopard Society. So in order to join, he took his stepdaughter and sacrificed his stepdaughter to them. They cut her into pieces by the limbs and cooked her over a fire and ate her as a group. Now we don't partake in any sort of human blood ritual or anything gory like that. We're very dignified, so you guys don't got to worry about that. But moving on, we still try to put our best foot forward and present ourselves as what we are, intelligent men. But enough with the introduction. Let's get forward into the meat of the episode, the life and mission of Reverend Tunis G. Campbell. So Reverend Tunis G. Campbell, he was born in Somerset County, New Jersey, on the first day of April in 1812. He was born to John Campbell, who was a well-off blacksmith in the North. He was the youngest of 9 siblings, consisting of 5 sisters and 4 brothers. At the ripe age of 5, a gentleman rode up on horseback and spoke to him as he was playing alongside the road with 2 of his sisters, and this man asked to speak to his mother. The man told Tunis's parents that he could get him into a school in Babylon on Long Island. A little bit of a divergence, but why would you name a town Babylon? I feel like that's kind of bad juju, but continuing. While he attended this school, he was the only colored child, but he spoke very well of his treatment there and had no complaints for the people he was being taught under, which given the time period is very surprising. So at the age of 18, he returns home and he was offered a position of a missionary as part of the American Colonization Society. To give further context as to what the American Colonized Society is, it was a movement created in 1812 by upper-class white men who believed black people were unable to integrate themselves into American society. The goal of the group was to send blacks back to Africa, and this is what led to the creation of the colony Liberia. It's in the name, Liberia, liberation, liberty. But to Tunis, this concept was very revolting. So, in the year 1832, he formed the Anti-Colonization Society, and he made the vow to never leave this country until all slaves on American soil were set free. A very honorable vow and goal. So during his younger years, Tunis, he was brought up in the Episcopal Church, but after finishing his primary education, he joined the Methodist Church. And while serving in the church, there's nothing short he experienced. He was mobbed while lecturing, and he was nearly killed. And a lot of this was due in part to him being the first moral reformer and temperance lecturer in the city of Five Points, New York. So a temperance lecturer is basically someone who teaches patience, Have patience with the white people. Don't let them bring you down. And focus on your own goals and missions. And with the help of community funding, he was able to build a mission house for the church and provide housing for freedmen in the North. But the violence towards him became so extensive that the mayor of New Jersey City had to send a policeman down to escort him to and from the ferry every Monday night to protect him during his travels. This is just the tip of the iceberg of the violence Tunis experienced in his life. So Campbell, moving forward, he was the principal waiter at the Howard Hotel in New York City for some time, from at least 1842 to 1845. He wrote a well-regarded guide to hotel management in 1848. It was called Hotel Keepers, Head Waiters, and Housekeepers Guide, and it's one of the earliest hospitality books by an African American. It contained a collection of culinary recipes and counsel on hotel management, and advice to employers and employees alike, and offered guidance to African American workers, which the hospitality industry was one of the few industries where African Americans were able to find paid employment. And at the same time, Campbell, he was active in establishing schools for colored children in New York, Brooklyn, and Williamsburg, which is part of the borough of Brooklyn. Also in Jersey City as well. He also assisted fugitive slaves whenever possible, people escaping from the South. Now, this is where the story of Tunis G. Campbell really starts to kick up. It was during the years of 1861, when he was a partner and general agent of Davies & Co., unfermented bread manufacturers. Interesting name, right? It was located on the corner of 3rd Avenue and 14th Street in New York City. They received the contract to supply the Sickles Brigade with bread at their camp on Staten Island. And when he went to deliver his bread at the storehouse, he would ask for it to be weighed and signed for on paper, before he'd unload it, so he could keep records of how much bread is being distributed. The storehouse keeper didn't want to sign his papers, presumably because of his skin color. So General Eaton, the chief quartermaster, was called to handle the matter, and he questioned Tunis on who made out his papers and who organized his data he's recording. Tunis responded with myself, and the unbelieving quartermaster, he asked him to make out one in front of him. The quartermaster was very impressed that a Negro of this character even existed. Of course, we know this level of competence to be normal for our race, but at the time this was surprising to him. So about a month later, General Eaton, he sends Tunis a letter, and he was appointed by Washington to inspect the commissary department and to report upon the sanitary condition of the troops on Staten Island. So him showing competence got him a job within the military. And he worked alongside General Eaton in the managing of the troops of Staten Island. And this was during the first years of the Civil War. So Tunis, now being in a military position, saw this as an opportunity to realize his dreams of the freedom of his people. So him and other colored men of prestige offered aid to the government in putting down the Southern Rebellion. They were denied at first by the Secretary Seward, But we all know the saying, a great man never takes no for an answer. So Tunis decided to cut out the middleman and mail Abraham Lincoln directly. And in about a month he received a package from the Secretary of War, which upon opening he received a commission ordering him to report with General Saxton at Hilton Head, South Carolina. There he remained with General Saxton and did whatever was entrusted with him with the utmost excellence. And shortly after the fall of Charleston comes one of Tunis's most grandiose achievements. He requested to be sent to the Sea Islands of Georgia. He was then assigned to the coastal islands of Burnside, Asaba, St. Catherine's Island, Sapelo, and the Colonial Islands. Very beautiful places if you haven't seen them. But he was sent here with orders to organize and establish governments alongside the islands to protect freemen and refugees for 30 miles back from the shore. So as the war raged on in the South, as black men were being freed from plantations by the Northern Army, they would send these black men to these islands where Tunis had established governments. And he remained here for 2 years, and he set up a school system alongside the islands with teachers he brought down from the north that he paid for. And he had a whole government, which he was the president, and then he had a Congress with a Senate and representatives along the islands, similar to our nation's government. But of course, the crooked ways of the 1800s America made its move. Tunis was removed from the head of the islands and replaced by General Tilson. And the schools he had established were broken up, and the people of the islands were driven off unless they chose to work under contracts purposely made to cheat the freedmen out of their labor. To quote Tunis himself, "Rebels who had before appeared humble and repentant now insisted that all colored men and women should sign these contracts. And when they refused, they would waylay them and beat them, telling them that they would have them back when the Yankees left the state." So these are people who repented for their sins during the South, but once they got control of the land, they were saying that after this war you're going to be our slaves again, which is unjust and unright. To backpedal a little bit, one of the first laws they passed on these islands when Tunis was in charge was that no white person could step foot on the island, which I thought was kind of funny. But after the loss of the islands, Tunis reported to General Tilson in Augusta that he could no longer return to the islands safely. But Tilson was unable to provide him with the assistance he needed. So, Tunis he returns to Savannah and purchases a sailboat from a small village called Thunderbolt. And he went to go see the people to tell them that if they would come onto the mainland, he would be able to provide a homestead for them. So Tunis, he purchases 1,250 acres of land in McIntosh County. Now the owner of this land was charging him $14.50 for an acre, which accounting for inflation nowadays would be $500. Now even saying that, this may seem like a grand steal in today's economy. $500 for an acre, that's insane. But back then this was well above the average price for an acre. The average price for an acre back then was like $4 to $5, maybe like $3, okay? And sometimes $7. But $14.50 is over double the average price, so he's swindling him. But after seeing the pitiful condition of the people on the island, he agreed to pay the incredible price. So he bought a flatboat to help people move their belongings down the Georgia coastline to the new homestead in McIntosh. The property was near worthless, as everything was scorched during the war. But Tunis wasn't discouraged by this, and he got to work moving his family there and building a camp for the settlers to stay. He built up cabins and rebuilt the farmland, refertilized it, and he writes in his book that he built 2 homes for himself, one home for him and his family to live in, and another one to cook in, which I found kind of odd. Why do you need a second house to cook? But maybe he didn't like sleeping with the smoke, or maybe the smoke got caught up. I don't know, but that's what he wrote in the book. But to continue, there's a story that he tells that during his absence from the homestead, a man who was, to quote, obnoxious to the white people, right, was arrested during his absence from the property. This man had been a sheriff on St. Catherine Island during Tunis's administration. And Tunis's wife, he refused to let the man be taken away until Tunis could come back to see justice be done in his case, which, raised the morale of the people, because they're still building up this land, building up the homestead. The man was later discharged as there was no real evidence against him. And Soon after this, Tunis was elected as a member of the Constitutional Convention as a senator for the 2nd District of the state of Georgia, after the passing of the Reconstruction Act of Congress. Although he was fairly elected, he had to fight alone on the Senate floor to have the right to hold his position in office, and while doing so, he faced threats of gritted teeth, armed pistols from Democratic members of the state. And not many people know this, but in the 1800s, it was actually the Republicans who fought for black liberation and freedom, and it was Democrats who were opposed to it. Nowadays, it's not like that. It kind of changed in the 70s with Ronald Reagan and such. But back then, it was the Democrats who did not like black people. So while he's fighting to keep his seat on the Senate floor, it was up to no avail, as the black members were intimidated and expelled from office. But Tunis was not discouraged by this setback, so him and his son, Tunis Campbell Jr., they joined a committee and went to Washington to protest against the removal and replacement of their seats in the Georgia Congress. Tunis met with both the New York chairman, E.D. Morgan, and Charles Summers of Massachusetts, telling them that the Congress needed to pass a law protecting all freedmen and all people of color in office. And this is what led to the passing of the 15th Amendment, which protected all men of color and their rights to vote and hold office. Tunis, he received many threats on his way back to Georgia, but regardless, he made it home on Christmas and was able to attend the General Assembly on January 5th. A great Christmas present, if you ask me. And in the General Assembly stood 10 men with pistols in hand, threatening to shoot down anyone who protested the removal of the white men who took the place of the honorably elected black men in the Georgia Assembly. They screamed threats like, "You better not read those or you will be cut in half by revolvers," to which Tunis would reply, "Of course I'll read them," referring to the written protests brought into the assembly. So, after he was sworn into office, he took out his protests and began to read them, and as each black man came into the assembly to be sworn in and replace his white counterpart, the Democratic members arose in full body in outrage to object, refusing any calls for order, not obeying anything. Tunis continued to read, raising his voice above their clamor and rioting. Tunis continued to lobby in Washington, urging for laws to be passed protecting the rights of loyal citizens in the southern states. And part of his lobbying led to the passing of the Ku Klux Bill. And the Ku Klux Bill was a bill that pertains that any member involved in the Ku Klux Klan, any member of the Ku Klux Klan, I should say rather, can be arrested immediately without a whole court process. They could be arrested just off of the suspicion of them being members of the Ku Klux Klan due to their violent acts in the South. So, after the passing of this bill, Tunis was informed of a plot to murder him on his way back home in Georgia. The plan was to stalk him on his way to church and murder him, and then leave his body in the woods, and then make it appear that a colored man from out in the country had done it. Fortunately, this plan didn't work. Tunis was very aware of this. So, in order to avoid this, he kept the militia around him at all times. He traveled with at least 400 men, the writings say, to protect him from the Ku Klux Klan, because he was very respected and honored at the time in the black community. But unfortunately, Tunis, he was then arrested and taken to Savannah under the Ku Klux Klan bill and fabricated charges. So they charged him for being part of the Ku Klux Klan under the bill he helped to get passed as a black man, which makes no sense at all. But to continue, while he was arrested, both his home and church were attacked, and it was all a part of coordinated attacks to keep him stuck in lawsuits and scare him into leaving the county. If he didn't, they would have killed him in jail. So he gets out of jail because the charges were claimed false, because why would a black man be part of the KKK? So, after being denied entry onto a steamboat en route to Savannah, he had to cross the country by wagon, with the only protection of his life being the law, to which we know doesn't like to serve black people. Tunis was then imprisoned again under a case of false imprisonment of a man named Rav. This man was charged with breaking into a house in which two families had lived and threatened to kill the men of the family. Tunis issued a warrant for his arrest, and upon the hearing, Rav was ordered to give bond of $50 to each family to keep peace and to pay the costs of court. Raff hired bondmen, but when he came back, he said he wouldn't pay the bonds, and to which Tunis ordered him to be locked up in response. Raff made an affidavit that he had given bonds and then ran away. So, because of him submitting this affidavit, to those who don't know, is a legally binding document, which is a statement of the truth used in courts. Tunis was indicted without notice of court. So while he was in Washington doing business, he came home to find his house and food stores had been burned down, and then he was arrested and denied his right to have access to his court records. He was then stated guilty and was sent to state prison. And then this is where he runs into a lot of trouble, going from jail to jail, and just general mistreatment and abuse of the law towards him. He was put in chains and forced to work within a prison camp and not fed. But fortunately, due to the work of his family and lawyers, he was only encamped there for 2 days until he was sent back to Atlanta. But during this process, he faced much blatant racism, like being denied transportation to Atlanta. The jailer said, after he received the orders to transport him back to Atlanta from the prison camp, he told him, "When are your people going to come get you?" And Tunis replied, "Your order specifically stated that you transport me." And he also described the food that was fed to him. He said it was a mix of cornmeal, which was mixed with water and baked on the outside, alongside a slab of fat bacon, in which, in Tunis's words, that 8 persons to 1 would find raw, saying the bacon was often uncooked. His family worked tirelessly to contact state officials and judges to collect the correct paperwork in order to obtain his freedom. But during this process, both his wife and son had warrants set out on their heads for their hunts. This is partially due because there's a story of his wife searching for one of the judges to sign one of the court papers, but this person kept dodging her. So she found of a grocery store that she frequented, and she waited for him to walk outside the grocery store, came up to him, and had him sign the papers. And this was seen as a threat to white society at the time, so they put out warrants on their heads saying that they people who disturb the peace. Obscene stuff. So, anyways, Tunis, he was released from the prison system only to be arrested again the next day on old claims, which he was already proven innocent under jury. These claims involve like possession of alcohol, some really small. He doesn't speak too much of it in his book. So here, after being arrested on old claims, he was sent to a decommissioned jail to where he was imprisoned for 8 months. Both him and his wife wrote to President Grant about this false imprisonment. And the same day of him learning of his wife's letter to the president, he was met by the Assistant Attorney General for the state of Georgia, Colonial G. Thomas. And Colonial G. Thomas, who was able to put in the work to get the process rolling of him being freed from this prison. But there's a caveat. Tunis, he was offered by the Democrats $35,000, which in today's money is $788,000, to preach under the direction of white landowners or to leave the state if you wish to be freed from prison. And before this, he was also offered in 1866 $5,000, $100,000 in today's money, a year, and a house in Georgia by the same people to preach under their orders. Many people in the church circle of Black America at the time took bribes like this because they didn't want preachers teaching certain things to the Black community, like temperance and focusing on building your own. They wanted to teach servience and just submission. He denied both of these offers, stating that he would earn his freedom justly or die in prison. He was then taken to a plantation where he was sent to work as a slave, and because after the abolishment of slavery, some people know this, that it's written in the 13th Amendment that if you're incarcerated in the prison system, you're a slave to the state. So you can still be used as a slave for slave labor if you're in the prison system. You still see men in the rural South picking cotton because of this law in the amendment to this day. And the plantation he was sent to work to had a terrible reputation. According to Tunis, 4 men were whipped to death there. And there was 2 women. One of them was a prisoner who was a worker there. Another one was a freed woman on hire, both women of color. and they both gave birth to white babies. So I'll let your imaginations see what happened there. Here he was for 11 months and 21 days on this plantation. So he's been falsely imprisoned and worked for over a year now, almost 2 years. But after persistent writing to President Grant by both his wife and daughter, the principal keeper of the land was ordered to have his chains removed and him be freed. So this was an order given to the owner of the land by the president. And after this, Tunis spends the rest of his life in retirement. He's getting in the old age at this point. He lives it out with his family, tending to the commune. But he still had a heavy influence in the political sphere. He was part of the passing of the 15th Amendment, the Ku Klux Klan bill, and just a general and a leader in the Civil War. A very proud figure that black people should and can be proud of. He was an honorable man who fought for justice and freedom within the black community, and he had the wit to form structured societies of black men and the diplomatic knowledge to fight for the right of black men to hold office. And despite the persecution he faced by the KKK and multiple different hate groups, he stood strong and unwavered until he was guaranteed his rights and freedoms. Tunis is a prime example of classical black excellence, someone we can all be proud of. So, this does continue the life and mission of Tunis G. Campbell. I will be linking in the description a link to his book and the Wikipedia page and some other writings about him. I will also be linking the link to our Discord, the Leopard Society Discord, if you wish to join and be a active member of our community. We're still building, but we have a lot of plans in the works. A lot of things to do, a lot of things we're building, and we have open arms to anybody who'd like to join and contribute. Anyways, this has been the Leopard Society Podcast, Episode 1. Episode 2 will be coming soon, but thank you for listening. Glad you were here. Take care and God bless.